So I wanted to just share my thoughts about designing for uncertainty, and really the reason for that is, this year has been so crazy for all of us. Woody Allen once said, "If you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans." So I told God my plans earlier this year, and he had a good laugh, and canceled all my holidays. Stuck me at home with three kids. Improvised homeschooling teacher. I ended up, with a gin and tonic habit with my wife, and suddenly found myself with a lockdown puppy, which was not in the plans at all. So it's just one of these things where, who knew, and we're all in the same boat, or all in the same storm. Now, when I was growing up, I'm from India, and when I was young, it was all about, studying and knowledge and doing well in school, and that's how you, get into university, and that's how you get a job, and that was the basis, I guess, that the foundation of what I grew up with, what I kind of believed in. And I actually ended up at Stanford Business School, which was in California. This was in the early 90s, 95 to 97, just at the time when the internet was taking off. And it was an amazing place to be, because there were all these possibilities and the opportunities from the technology, and people were running around trying to work out how to make the most of this environment, and startups were sort of mushrooming everywhere. And I remember I had a professor at business school in my second year, and he told us, he said, you learn all these tools and techniques, all this analysis, but then as you get later in your career, you find that you have to use your instincts more, you use your judgment more, you're making decisions with incomplete information. And I was 25 at the time, and I sort of stored this away for future use, but it wasn't particularly relevant, or it didn't make a ton of sense at the time. Now, understand that human nature is about wanting to know, wanting to understand, to look ahead, and to be able to predict what's going to happen next. And I think that's part of the foundation almost for the scientific revolution. And it's something which we almost take for granted. René Descartes, who is a French mathematician, and probably better known as a philosopher, he said, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. And that's the basis for this, the rational mind, the empiricism, the belief in knowledge. However, there are exceptions as well. So William Goldman he's a screenwriter, and he's a legend in Hollywood. And he wrote a book called I can't remember, a book about the movie industry. And the first line was "Adventures in Screen Trade" is the name of the book. His first line was "Nobody knows anything," and that basically debunked this myth about these hit movies and these star directors and these amazing screenwriters. The reality is that everyone wants a hit, but no one in Hollywood really knows what it takes to make one every single time. And so that principle, Goldman's principle of nobody knows anything, undermines this idea of we have to know, we should know, we need to learn more, we need to figure this out. And it's fascinating, because it's not just a difference of opinion, it's an entirely different mindset. And the concept which he kind of put forward is, how do we create success, or try to achieve something, when in fact what we don't know is so much greater than what we do know. Now, I'm neither a philosopher nor a screenwriter, but my experience in software development and in technology over the last 25 years, I've seen this change happen. Now, when I started, I finished Stanford Business School in 97, and I kind of fell into the tech industry almost. And I joined an internet consulting firm called Viant in San Francisco. And at the time, the way software was built was using what's called the waterfall method. So business users would say, okay, this is the problem we're trying to solve. This is the software we want to build, and these are the specifications. And then software engineers would go away and they would try to develop the software. And now this inevitably, unfortunately, led to arguments and cost overruns and delays, because the reality is that business owners don't know what they want. And software engineers, ironically, don't know how the software is going to turn out until they've tried. And this causes, endless problems leading to, people losing their job or trying to get an additional team of software engineers to develop something which causes more delays and so forth. So about 20 years ago or so, a team of enlightened people came up with a new idea. This was in 2006. I was running a software engineering team, and we decided to try out this newfangled approach of agile development. So we set about and adopted the practices, which is about having a whiteboard which is full of post-its with features which need to be built, and you create what's known as sprints. So you do 2 weeks of work, and you ship the software. You see how it works, and then you develop another sprint for 2 weeks, and you keep going in that way. It was new, but I found it tremendously powerful because it acknowledged the fact that we didn't know exactly what our users and customers wanted. We didn't know exactly what features would stick and which ones wouldn't work. And we didn't exactly know what the metrics would look like at each stage of the process. And this worked so well because each member of the team could then observe what other people were doing, be part of the decision-making process, much more information, and acknowledging that none of us knew exactly what the final product would look like. There's a great quote by Tim Ferriss, one of my favorite authors who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek. He said, it's like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as the headlights will go, but you can get to your destination just driving that way. And that's the principle, I guess, of agile development, which is you can only see a couple of weeks ahead, but if you keep going like that, you'll get to your final destination. Now, these stories are from 15 years ago. So some of these ideas and principles are now commonplace in the world of technology. So Eric Ries wrote a book called The Lean Startup, which is perhaps the Bible of iterative development, of being able to launch and learn, as management would put it. Now it's in our vocabularies to say, let's iterate until we find the right product fit, or let's pivot if we're heading in the wrong direction. This is taken for granted in technology companies. But I'm not a software engineer, so in the world of business, what I find is that in fact people are still often doing things the old way, which is, what's the 5-year plan? What's the annual budget for next year? What are the forecasts which we need to hit? And the reality is that what ends up happening is you get locked into a way of thinking which doesn't fit with the world that we're seeing around us. Last year was a good example, and I think next year's is likely to be that as well. So what do we do about this? Well, I was inspired by my experience with using Agile for software and decided to try to adapt it for the business environment. So I was working on a project with a mixed team. There were engineers, there were marketeers, there were finance people, and we decided to adapt the principles using the same kind of idea, which is we don't know exactly where we're going to end up. Let's organize around tasks which are bite-sized pieces. Let's have a whiteboard like the Agile practitioners do, and the different colors represent the different work streams, and chunked into 2-week sprints, which basically says, let's get to the end of those 2 weeks, lift our heads, look around, see what we've done, what do we not know, and how do we mitigate the unknown over the next 2 weeks, and then go again. Now, this project basically acknowledged the fact that we were living in a time of uncertainty. Now, fast forward to 2021. We know one thing for sure, which is next year is going to be an uncertainty. I heard a great quote. I was at Imperial College's event a couple of years ago, which looks 20 years out. And they said, one thing is for certain, besides death and taxes, is uncertainty. And it's true. even though we'd like to get away from that. Every year brings this uncertainty. So what I think, should get away from is trying to wrestle that down and say, we need to find out. Rather, I think what we need to do is to look for the unknowns. So to really look hard at what are the things which we can't predict, what are the things which we don't know. Because with that comes the realization, in fact, that there's so much out there that we don't have a good handle on. So what are we going to do about that? One of the techniques which I like to use is to look at things from a different perspective. And looking at the world from our customer's shoes is a great place to start. And it's amazing because a lot of businesses either don't do that, are not in the habit of doing it, or don't do it well. So if we put ourselves in our customer's shoes, we can think from their perspective. What uncertainty are they facing? How are they responding? What are their fears? And it gives us a different perspective. We're all caught up in this. And the reality is that we have very few answers at this point in time. But there are ways to start constructing, what one can do. And one of them is to open up to new ideas and new possibilities. So just to park our own narrow perspective on the world and think about when the climate changes, for instance, how do animals adapt? What can we learn from that? Or what are they doing in other countries? When China reacted to the virus, what did they do and what was successful? What could we glean? It could be in a different industry. So how is fashion responding? I have a friend who's in the beer business. What are they doing in this situation? And to be able to sort of assimilate and to integrate perspectives and learnings from different points of view is really helpful. I think the third thing is to set up for experimentation. And by acknowledging and allowing experiments to run, it does two things. One, discovers new ways of doing things, new practices, new habits, but it also allows for failure. It also allows for things to go wrong, because that's the nature, the absolute sort of basics of experiments. And it's okay if there's setbacks, and one can dust oneself off and try again. And then it's about organizing around adaptable and not about predictable. What do I mean by that? So it's not having long-term strategy. It's about being nimble in one's thinking. It's not about budgets which run for a year. It's about building flexibility in. It's about attracting employees and leaders who are comfortable with change and uncertainty and actually sort of enjoy it. It's about having structures which are not permanent. So having squads which come together to attack a problem and then disband and move on. So all of those, actions and that thinking and those outcomes comes from basing on an acknowledgement of uncertainty rather than a desire to sort of wrestle uncertainty to the ground. So I guess that more or less wraps up my message. So I'm, waiting for the new normal is not going to happen. It makes God laugh, in my view. I think what we need to try to do is to thrive on uncertainty and actually, take full advantage of being in the situation that we are, not just this year, not just next year, but I think as a matter of course. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dhiraj. I found that fascinating. That contrast between, as you say, human nature being that we want to know, we want to know everything, but versus nobody actually knows almost anything about anything at all is kind of really mind-boggling, but so true at the same time. Can I ask you to try and summarize your key message from this talk? What's the thing you'd want to people to take away from your talk in just 15 seconds, please?
Yeah, so I would say is don't wait for the new normal, but design your business to thrive on uncertainty.